Have you ever stopped to think about what happens behind the curtains of Hollywood glamour, especially when P. Diddy is one of the leaders? Today we will hear from Ethan, a former assistant in the entertainment industry who shares the shocking details of his experience alongside one of the most powerful and enigmatic figures in music, Diddy and Jay-Z. Discover how control, manipulation, and fear shape the destinies of young artists in a ruthless system. But first, don't forget to subscribe to our channel to receive more videos like this. Ethan Cole's report begins like this. I never imagined that the day would come when I would tell you what I am going to share with you today. My name is Ethan Cole, and for years I have worked behind the scenes in the entertainment industry, in a world where the brightest lights outshine the darkest shadows. For a long time, I was witness to events and secrets that few dare even imagine. Some will say that my story is an invention, that it is nothing more than an attempt to attract attention. But for those who look beyond the surface, you will know that the truth, however disturbing, has a peculiar way of making itself heard. When I started my career, I thought I was walking into a dream. Hollywood, with all its glamour, has always seemed like a place where anything was possible. But I soon realized that that glow was deceptive, like a mirror that reflects only what you want to see. The closer you get, the more you notice the cracks. And sometimes what's behind the mirror is something you never wish you had seen. Over the years, I have witnessed things that have made me question my own sanity. I've always been a curious person, and maybe that was my mistake. Asking too many questions, looking the wrong way, listening to conversations that weren't meant for me. That's how I came across a side of the industry that no one wants to admit exists. The side where dreams are used as bargaining chips, where the powerful manipulate the fragile, and where secrets are kept at any cost. And it was in this scenario that I met Sean "Diddy" Combs, a name that for many is synonymous with success, music, and achievements. But for those who really know him, he is much more than that. He is the epicenter of a system that feeds fear, control, and submission. From the first moment I saw Diddy, I knew he was different. Not just for his charisma or presence, but for something deeper, something almost impossible to explain. It was as if he carried with him an invisible yet palpable power that made the air change when he entered a room. I could have chosen to close my eyes, being just another cog in the wheel, doing my job and ignoring what was around me. But the truth is, once you start watching, you can't stop. And the more I saw, the more I realized I needed to leave. And most importantly, I needed to tell this story. If you like stories that go beyond the surface, if you're tired of only seeing what they want you to see, this is the right place to be. I want you to accompany me on this journey. Let's explore together the shadows behind the shine, the secrets behind the power, and the truths that many try to hide. And before we begin, I want to invite you to be part of this mission. Subscribe to the channel, activate the bell so you don't miss the next videos, and check out the special gift I left in the pinned comments. It's something I wish I had received years ago when I still believed I was entering a dream. Maybe it can help you see the world differently. Now, without further ado, let me tell you how it all started. The shine, the applause, the parties, and of course the shadows that were always there, waiting to be revealed. Let's get started. I clearly remember the day I saw Sean "Diddy" Combs for the first time. It was an exclusive event, the kind of party where every face was familiar and every move was choreographed to look natural. But nothing was accidental. I was newly hired, and like any newcomer, I felt more like a spectator than part of that world. But as soon as he entered the room, everything changed. Diddy wasn't like other stars. Most of the artists entered with an entourage, surrounded by advisors and security guards, speaking loudly, trying to attract attention. He didn't need it. Her presence did that for him. When he walked through the door, it felt like the very air changed. Conversations stopped for a moment. Nervous laughter arose, and everyone's eyes, even if surreptitiously, turned to him. It was as if he was more than a man. He was an event, a force. But there was something strange, something I couldn't identify at the time. His posture was impeccable, his smile was charming, but his eyes told another story. They were cold, calculating, like he was always planning his next move. It was like looking at a king on his throne, someone who knew he controlled everything around him. On that first date, he walked past me without even noticing me, but I noticed something that would stay with me for a long time. The people around him weren't really smiling. They laughed, they joked, but there was something forced in their expressions, like carefully placed masks. I wondered if it was respect or fear he inspired. At that moment, it seemed impossible to know. Over time, I began to understand that Diddy was more than a producer or manager. He was a maestro, controlling not only his music and his business, but also the people around him. He knew exactly who to manipulate, when to use fear, and when to offer a false sense of security. It was a game, and he was the only one who knew all the rules. A specific situation still echoes in my mind. It was a meeting with some new artists, young promises who were visibly nervous. Diddy entered the room and immediately took control. He didn't need to speak loudly. His presence was enough to silence any doubt or hesitation. As he talked about contracts and opportunities, I noticed something disturbing. No one dared question him, not even the executives present. Everyone simply agreed, as if his words were indisputable. It was at that moment that I realized that Diddy wasn't just a powerful figure. He was a master manipulator. Every word was carefully chosen, every gesture was planned. He knew how to make people feel like they were indebted to him, even when he offered them nothing more than words. This ability of absolute control was frightening, but what haunted me was what I didn't see. What happened when the doors were closed? What did he do to keep so many people under his thumb? These questions began to haunt me, and I knew that sooner or later I would find the answers, even if I wasn't prepared for them. Diddy wasn't just a star, he was a force that dominated everything and everyone around him. But at what cost? That was the question I couldn't get out of my head. I was just beginning to understand that the glow that surrounded him hid something much darker. What I didn't know was that this was just the surface of the abyss I was about to explore. When I started working behind the scenes, one of the things that fascinated me most was the sparkle in the eyes of young artists. Each of them seemed to carry a flame, an unshakable desire to conquer the world. They were full of talent, energy, and hope, but over time, I realized that this flame was quickly extinguished. Diddy was a master at capturing those dreams and weaponizing them. He knew exactly how to manipulate the hopes of these young people. At first, he surrounded them with promises of success and security. Contracts were presented as unique opportunities, like golden tickets to stardom. "Trust me," he said, and many did. How not to trust? He was Diddy, the man who seemed to touch gold and turn it into platinum. But the promises came with a price. And that price, I soon discovered, was the soul of each of them. Those who signed the contracts often did not notice the hidden clauses, not just in the papers, but in the dynamics of the agreement itself. It was as if, by accepting the contract, they were signing an invisible pact, something that went far beyond music and fame. I remember one singer in particular, Sarah. She was young, full of energy, and had a voice that made the entire studio stop and listen. When she first arrived, we all knew she was special. But in the weeks that followed, something changed. Sarah, who had previously entered the studio beaming, began to look dull. His posture was more hunched, his smile rarer, his eyes filled with something I could only describe as fear. One night, after a long recording session, she found me in the hallway. She seemed to want to say something, but hesitated. After an uncomfortable silence, she finally spoke. "Do you think it's worth it? All of this?" Before I could respond, one of Diddy's assistants appeared and took her away. That was the last time I saw Sarah in the studio. She never released her album, and shortly after, she disappeared completely from the radar. I started to realize that this was more common than I imagined. Promising artists would suddenly appear, shining brightly, only to disappear as quickly as they had arrived. Some seemed to give up. Others simply disappeared without a trace. It was as if there was an invisible force that decided who would go up and who would be discarded. I would hear rumors about conditions that needed to be met. These were not just contract clauses or performance requirements. There were strange requests, private events, meetings that never appeared on any official agenda. Artists who resisted these conditions faced a dark path, cancelled contracts, opportunities that evaporated, and even scandals that seemed to appear out of nowhere. Diddy was the architect of that system. He not only set the rules, but also ensured that they were followed. For him, talent was not the main requirement for success. It was submission, blind loyalty, and the willingness to sacrifice anything to stay in the game. And for those who didn't follow the rules, there was only one way out: oblivion. The more I saw, the more I understood that the game was much bigger than I could imagine. It wasn't just about music or business. It was a system carefully designed to control, exploit, and discard. And Diddy was the maestro, conducting everything with terrifying precision. I began to question everything: morality, the meaning of success, and even my own position there. I knew I was observing something monstrous, but at the same time, I felt powerless to do anything about it. Dream-shattering promises were everywhere, and the glitz of Hollywood was just a façade to hide the darkness that consumed those who dared enter. I'll never forget the night I got the invite to a party at Diddy's mansion. It was a rare honor, something reserved only for those who had earned his trust, or who he believed would be useful in his game. Most people would have been excited, but deep down, I felt something different. It was a mix of anxiety and discomfort, as if something in the air was telling me to stay away. When I arrived at the mansion, I understood why. The property was on top of a hill, shrouded in thick fog that seemed to suffocate the environment. There was no sound of birds, wind, or any other common noise, just an oppressive silence that made each step feel heavier. As soon as I got out of the car, I had the feeling that I was being watched, even though there was no one visible around. Upon entering, the discomfort increased. The mansion inside was luxurious, but in a way that didn't feel welcoming. The windows were covered with heavy curtains, and the air had a peculiar smell, a mixture of incense and something metallic, almost like blood. The walls were decorated with pictures of eyes, dozens of them, that seemed to follow me as I walked down the halls. The main hall was the heart of the party, but there was no joy there. People laughed and talked, but their smiles were forced, and their voices sounded mechanical, as if they were reading an invisible script. In the center of the room, Diddy sat on a makeshift throne, surrounded by figures that looked more like shadows than people. He observed everything with an expression that mixed satisfaction and absolute control, like a vigilant king in his castle. I tried to go unnoticed, but I couldn't ignore the details around me. A group of young artists were gathered in a corner, visibly uncomfortable. They barely spoke and avoided making eye contact. It was clear they were out of their comfort zone, like prey surrounded by predators. It was then that something disturbing happened. During the party, I heard muffled screams coming from a hallway in the background. They were short but intense, as if someone was trying to call for help, but had been quickly silenced. My heart raced. When I asked one of Diddy's assistants what was going on, he just laughed nervously and replied, "It happens all the time. It's just for fun." Curiosity and fear consumed me. so I decided to investigate. I followed the sound down a dark, narrow hallway where the lights flickered as if they were about to go out. The air was freezing, and each step seemed to take me deeper into something I knew I shouldn't see. Before I could go any further, a tall, intimidating security guard appeared, blocking my path. "This area is not for you," he said, his voice low and threatening. With no options, I retreated. When I returned to the main hall, the atmosphere felt even heavier. Diddy's gaze met mine for a moment, and in that instant, I felt like he knew exactly where I'd been and what I'd heard. It was as if he was warning me, without saying a word, that I should stay in my place. The party continued for hours, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something terrible was happening behind the curtains. The conversations around me seemed like distant echoes, and every smile I saw seemed to hide a dark secret. That night, I realized that this mansion wasn't just a party place. It was a symbol of something much larger, a system of power, fear, and control that operated in the shadows. When I finally left the mansion, I looked back and felt a shiver run down my spine. I knew that night had changed something inside me. What was once just curiosity was now a certainty. I was dealing with something much darker than I could imagine. Diddy wasn't just a producer or a powerful businessman. He was the architect of a dangerous game, and everyone who entered his orbit was at the mercy of his rules. I knew I needed to leave, but I also knew that in order to leave, I needed to understand what I was facing. The party at the mansion was just the beginning of the nightmare that was to come. After the mansion party, my perception of Diddy and the world around him completely changed. I knew there was something deeply wrong, something no one talked about but everyone seemed to fear. The following weeks were filled with small details that, when connected, began to reveal a frightening pattern. And at the center of it was a place that many whispered about, but few dared to mention: the Room of Secrets. The Room of Secrets was an exclusive space hidden deep within Diddy's studio. It was a place that no one talked about openly, but that everyone knew existed. Access was extremely restricted, reserved only for those who were part of Diddy's inner circle or those he was molding in his image. When I asked a co-worker about the room, he just shook his head and muttered, "If you value your sanity, don't try to find out." My curiosity, however, was greater than my fear. During one night when the studio was almost empty, I decided to explore. I found the door hidden at the end of a hallway that seemed darker than the rest of the building. It was a discreet wooden door without a sign or identification, but its presence was almost magnetic. I touched the doorknob, but before I could turn it, one of the security guards appeared out of nowhere. He didn't say anything, just looked at me with an expression that didn't need words. I wasn't welcome there. What happened in that room remained a mystery, but the rumors were enough to make me uneasy. Some people said that this was where the most important contracts were sealed, not with a signature, but with dark oaths and personal submissions. Others spoke of strange rituals, exclusive ceremonies that cemented the loyalty of participants. I didn't know what was true, but one thing was certain. Everyone who left that room looked different. I remember a young rapper I'll call Jason. He was talented, charismatic, and had everything it took to become a star. When he was invited to the Room of Secrets, he seemed excited, believing it was a sign that his career was about to take off. However, when he came out, something about him had changed. His smile was gone, his eyes were empty, and he avoided contact with everyone. "They made me promise things I don't understand," he once told me, before walking away from the studio for good. Jason disappeared from the industry weeks later. I began to realize that the Room of Secrets was not just a physical space. She was a symbol, a microcosm of the system Diddy ran. Entering it meant more than closing a deal. It was accepting the invisible conditions that came with power and fame. Those who resisted or refused, like Jason, were quickly dismissed or silenced. But what happened to those who accepted? They became part of Diddy's circle, but at what cost? I saw artists who seemed to thrive once they entered the room, but something about them was never the same. It was as if they had lost something essential, a part of themselves that they could never get back. They continued to glow, but their glow was artificial, like a light that only existed as long as Diddy allowed it. For me, the Room of Secrets became a symbol of everything that was wrong with that system. It wasn't just about contracts or commitments, it was about absolute control. Diddy wasn't just a leader, he was a manipulator, someone who knew exactly how to use people's vulnerability and ambition against themselves. I knew I needed to walk away, but I also knew that once you see something like that, you can't just forget about it. The Room of Secrets was just one piece of the puzzle, but it was a piece that revealed how dark the game was. What else was hiding behind Diddy's closed doors? That question wouldn't leave my head, and I knew the answers would be even more disturbing. It was only when I started connecting the dots that I realized the true extent of the control Diddy exerted. He didn't just manipulate careers, he controlled lives. His system was a ruthless machine designed to crush anyone who dared challenge it or break its invisible rules. And at the heart of it all was the same question that had tormented me since the beginning. How far would he go to maintain his power? The first clear sign of this mechanism came at a meeting I attended involving a young singer called Liam. He was new to the industry, but he had something special, an energy that made everyone believe he was the next big thing. During the meeting, Liam presented a bold idea for his career, something that went against the usual mold. Diddy listened to him silently, without expressing any emotion. When Liam finished, Diddy simply said, "You still don't understand how this works." The tension in the room was palpable. Liam tried to argue, but Diddy cut him off with a cold smile. "You have talent, boy, but talent is not enough. Either you play the game, or you're out." It seemed like a casual statement, but everyone in the room got the message. Diddy didn't negotiate, he decreed. Liam left the room visibly shaken, and a few weeks later, I heard that his contract had been terminated. He disappeared from the radar, like so many others before him. It was at that moment that I realized that Diddy's system wasn't just about music or business. It was a power game, where total submission was the only valid currency. Those who refused to play were quickly eliminated, while those who complied were molded into Diddy's image and likeness. It wasn't about creating stars, it was about creating extensions of yourself. I remember an even more disturbing case involving a pair of talented producers who worked at the studio. They had innovative ideas, but their proposals often went against what Diddy wanted. One night, after a particularly tense meeting, I heard Diddy say to one of his assistants, "Make sure they learn who's boss here." The next day, the two were removed from their projects without any explanation. Within a month, both left the industry, citing burnout in vague statements. The manipulation didn't stop behind the scenes. Even established artists were not immune. One case that left a deep impression on me was that of a veteran singer who I will call Vanessa. She was an established star, but even so, she seemed to fear Diddy in a way I didn't understand. During a recording session, I heard Diddy berating her for something trivial. Vanessa, who was usually firm and confident, simply lowered her head and apologized. The scene bothered me deeply. How could someone with so much power and experience be reduced to that state? Over time, it became clear that Diddy's control was not exercised solely through contracts or financial agreements. He used a combination of psychological manipulation, blackmail, and intimidation to keep people in their place. He knew exactly which buttons to push, which fears to exploit, and how to make people feel like they had no choice but to comply. For those who played the game, the rewards were great. Success, fame, and access to resources most people can only dream of. But for those who resisted, the cost was high. They were erased from the system, their careers destroyed, their reputations tarnished. It was a constant reminder that in Diddy's world, you played by his rules, or you didn't play at all. The more I saw, the more it became clear that this wasn't just an individual power play. It was a complete system, a web of control that extended far beyond Diddy. He was the visible face of something much larger, something that operated in the shadows, ensuring that everyone remained in position. This realization hit me like a blow. I was stuck in a cog in a machine that couldn't stop. The question that tormented me was, how far would this system go to protect its secrets? And more importantly, how could I escape without becoming the next target? When I realized the depth of control Diddy exerted, one thing became clear. If I stayed there, I would end up consumed by the same system that had already swallowed so many others. I needed to leave. But before that, I felt I had an obligation to expose what was happening. I didn't know how, but I knew the world needed to know the truth. I began discreetly collecting evidence, files, emails, recordings, anything that could corroborate what I had witnessed. It was dangerous work, and every click on the computer seemed to carry the weight of something forbidden. My biggest discovery was a set of documents that detailed unusual financial transactions, altered contracts, and most disturbingly, a list of names. Artists, producers, assistants. They were all there, with notes next to their names like controlled, discarded, or potential threat. But my curiosity soon caught my attention. I began to notice that my movements were being monitored. Certain looks in the studio were longer than before, and I would often find my computer experiencing strange activity, as if someone had gone through my files. Then came the anonymous messages. One of them simply said, "They know what you're doing." My heart raced. I knew I was entering dangerous territory, but I didn't want to back down. However, things took an even darker turn when I started noticing unfamiliar cars parked near my house. One night, while driving home from work, a black SUV followed me for several blocks before disappearing. It wasn't paranoia. I knew I was being watched. The breaking point came when my house was broken into. Nothing was stolen, but my files were ransacked. It was a clear message. They wanted me to know they could reach me wherever I was. The next day, when I arrived at the studio, I was greeted by Rule, one of the security guards who looked different from the others. He wasn't just a pawn, he understood the game. "Today is your last day here," he said in a tone that was both a warning and an order. "Take your things and don't come back. If you want to survive, disappear." There was something in his voice that convinced me. It wasn't just a suggestion, it was a chance to escape. I knew that if I stayed, I would end up like so many others, silenced, discarded, or worse. I grabbed my things and left without looking back, but even after leaving, the shadows of the system continued to follow me. I received more anonymous messages, this time warning that no one leaves completely. I didn't know what it meant, but the fear of being found never went away. For weeks, I looked over my shoulder, waiting for the moment when they would return to finish what they started. Still, the idea of exposing the truth never left me. What I witnessed was too big to be buried. I knew sharing my story meant taking risks, but the world needed to know. Because in the end, what Diddy built wasn't just a career or a brand. It was a control machine, a network of power that operated at the expense of dreams, lives, and dignity. My escape was just the beginning. I knew the system was still there, relentless and working perfectly. But now, I was out. And even if that meant living in fear, at least it meant I was still alive. And for me, that was enough to start telling the truth. Even after I left, the shadows of the system continued to haunt me. With each news story about Diddy or another industry giant, I felt like I was reliving everything I witnessed. The memories wouldn't leave me, and the faces of those I saw erased. Artists like Liam, Jason, Sarah, and so many others still haunt my thoughts. Over time, I realized that escaping the system did not mean being free from it. He was like an invisible mark, something you carry without even wanting to. Whenever someone mentioned Hollywood as a place of dreams and glamour, a part of me wanted to scream, wanted to tell everyone what really goes on behind the curtains, but at the same time, fear still held me back. I knew the system was bigger than any individual, bigger than Diddy. He was a machine, and I had barely escaped. Accusations against Diddy began to surface. Young artists and former assistants began to speak, their accounts painting a picture I knew all too well. Among them was Kevin, the colleague who had disappeared after alerting me to the compromising files. He reappeared, giving interviews and revealing disturbing details. But, as expected, he was prosecuted, discredited, and silenced again. The system reacted brutally against any attempt to expose its weaknesses. Even so, some voices continued to echo. More stories emerged, each revealing a new layer of manipulation and control. But for every revelation, there was a counter-offensive. Evidence disappeared, witnesses were intimidated, and the truth was buried under an avalanche of lies and money. And me? I remained on the sidelines, watching from afar, feeling torn between the need to tell my story and the desire to stay safe. Sharing what I knew meant putting my life at risk again, but not speaking meant carrying the weight of silence. That's when I decided to start telling my story. Fragments, pieces of a greater truth. I knew I couldn't reveal everything at once, but perhaps over time, each part would help unmask the system. What I witnessed in Hollywood is not unique to the entertainment industry. It is a reflection of something bigger, something that exists wherever power is too concentrated in the hands of a few. Diddy, as central as he was to this story, was just a cog in a much larger machine. But he represented her worst: absolute control, psychological manipulation, and destruction of anyone who dared resist. Today, I see the world with different eyes. I always wonder, how many systems like this are there? How many dreams are sacrificed in the name of power? And most importantly, how can we protect ourselves from these forces? That's why I started sharing my story, to raise awareness, to make people look beyond appearances and prepare for the unexpected. Before closing, I want to extend an invitation to you who have come this far. Reflecting on what is hidden in the shadows is the first step, but it is also important to be prepared to deal with what may come to light. So I left something special in the comments fixed, a guide that composed with everything I learned about how to survive and protect yourself in a world controlled by forces that prefer to operate in the dark. You may never have to use this knowledge, but if you ever need it, you'll be ready. After all, what is hidden in the shadows always finds a way to emerge, and when that happens, I want you to be prepared. See you in the next video, or perhaps in the shadows.